Sheri Lawson, 27, was publicly accused of lies and betrayal, but instead of breaking, she chose truth as her weapon. In one shocking night, she exposed her rival's corruption, turning humiliation into empowerment. What followed was a battle of survival sabotage, threats, courtroom fights, and the ultimate collapse of a toxic empire. This is not just a revenge story. It's about resilience, justice, and the strength to rise from tragedy. Sheri's journey proves that the loudest victory is reclaiming your voice. Watch till the end. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful true stories. I am Sheri Lawson, 27 years old, and this is the story of how one poisonous sentence tried to erase me but instead ignited something far more dangerous than humiliation. It awakened my truth. The evening of the charity fundraiser remains seared in my memory, not for the shimmering gowns or the glittering chandeliers, but for the way her words sliced through the room like sharpened glass. "She's deceiving you all," she declared, her voice rising with theatrical venom, echoing off the marble walls so loudly that even those in the back rows turned their heads. I felt every syllable burn into me, scorching my ears, heating my blood until shame pulsed beneath my skin like a fever I could not break. Faces swiveled in my direction, eyes narrowing, whispers spreading like a disease, suspicion blooming in every corner. I stood frozen, my hands trembling, my throat tightening with the weight of 100 unspoken defenses. But something inside me resisted the urge to break down. I knew the game she played. I had watched her spin webs of manipulation for years, always escaping the fallout by casting her venom onto someone else. Tonight, she thought it was my turn to crumble. I felt the room tilt, as though the floor might vanish beneath my heels. But instead of collapsing, I remembered the folder hidden in my bag, the single line I had rehearsed silently for weeks in case this day arrived. My chest rose, heavy with the air of defiance, and as silence thickened after her accusation, I let the sentence leave my lips, deliberate, sharp, and deadly. I said just one line I knew would unravel her carefully constructed mask. "Ask your brother who really signed the documents." The shift was instant. A murmur of confusion spread, a crackle of curiosity stronger than her accusation. I caught the flicker of panic in her eyes before she could disguise it, the faint tightening of her jaw, the flash of fear that betrayed the confidence in her stance. And then, slowly, her brother, once her most loyal defender, took a step toward me, his brow furrowed, his trust in her visibly trembling. The audience turned as one to witness his hesitation, and I knew, with a chilling certainty, that this night was only the beginning. The silence that followed was more suffocating than the insult itself, a silence that pressed against my chest like an invisible weight. I could hear the faint clink of someone nervously setting down their wine glass, the hushed rustle of sequined gowns shifting as people leaned closer, desperate not to miss a single word. Her brother's face had gone pale, his jaw tightening as though he were replaying memories in his mind that he had long tried to bury. I could see it, the shadow of recognition flashing across his eyes, the tremor in his hands that betrayed a truth he wished to deny, but could no longer contain. She, on the other hand, forced a laugh, brittle and hollow, the kind of laugh that breaks under its own weakness. "She's lying," she said quickly, her voice attempting a casual wave of dismissal, but there was no strength behind it. No thunder like before. The crowd, once eager to believe her, now looked at me with a curiosity that burned hotter than suspicion. I held their gaze, refusing to blink, refusing to surrender. Inside, my heart hammered like a drum, my breath uneven, but I knew I couldn't falter. The folder in my bag felt heavier now, not just paper and ink but a weapon, a shield, a voice for the years of betrayal I had swallowed. Her brother finally spoke, his voice low, but trembling with an authority no one could ignore. "What documents, Sheri? What are you talking about?" The room leaned into his words, every eye bouncing between us like spectators in a court trial. I did not answer immediately. Instead, I let the silence stretch, let her squirm in its grip, let her imagination paint horrors that even my words could not rival. She shifted uncomfortably, her painted smile faltering, as beads of sweat shimmered at her temple despite the cool air. And in that stretched, unbearable pause, I understood something I had never admitted to myself before. This was not just about me. It was about every person she had crushed under her ambition, every colleague silenced, every reputation ruined. Tonight, I carried their ghosts with me. My reply came slow, deliberate, my voice trembling at first, but gaining strength with every word. The ones you forged in his name. The ones that prove who the real deceiver is. Gasps rippled through the hall like a physical wave, and for the first time, she could not control the narrative. Her brother stepped back from her, his face ashen, and I knew the night was far from over, it was only unraveling. The sound of those gasps clung to the air, refusing to fade, echoing like a chorus of judgment that no one could silence. For years, she had mastered the art of twisting perceptions, of wielding gossip and insinuation like weapons sharp, enough to bleed reputations dry. But this time the balance had shifted. Her eyes darted around the hall, seeking allies, searching desperately for a nod, a smile, even the faintest look of reassurance that someone still believed her version of events. None came. Instead, the crowd hovered in uncertainty, torn between the polished image she had always displayed and the cracks now visible in her facade. I stood perfectly still, my fingers digging into the strap of my bag, grounding myself in the reality that I had spoken the line I once only dared whisper in the privacy of my apartment. My stomach twisted in knots, fear gnawing at me, because exposing her meant exposing myself too if I faltered. If I couldn't back my words, I would be devoured. But then her brother's gaze locked with mine, and I saw something shift in him. He had always been loyal to her, not because he trusted her completely, but because family loyalty had blinded him. Tonight, however, he saw beyond the mask. "Answer her," he demanded, his voice firmer this time, echoing through the silence like a verdict already passed. She tried to laugh again, but the sound cracked, brittle and broken, like glass splintering under pressure. "This is absurd," she muttered, her smile pulling tightly at the edges, but her eyes betrayed her wild, cornered, trembling. I could feel the audience leaning further into the moment, drawn by the scent of blood in the water, craving the climax of the spectacle. My chest rose and fell rapidly, and for a fleeting second, doubt threatened to choke me. What if they turned on me instead? What if the proof wasn't enough? But then I remembered every whispered warning, every time I stayed silent as she stole credit for work that wasn't hers, every meeting where my voice was muted by her lies, every scar she left invisible yet raw upon my self-worth. This was bigger than fear. Slowly I unzipped my bag, the sound sharp in the silence, a sound that made her flinch as though I had cocked a gun. The folder appeared in my hands, its weight both terrifying and liberating. My fingers trembled, but my voice did not when I said, "You want truth? Then let's show them all." The crowd inhaled as one, holding its breath, and for the first time in years, she was the one cornered, her power slipping through her grasp like sand. The folder in my hands felt heavier than stone, though it was nothing more than paper and ink bound together by thin plastic sleeves. Yet, inside those pages lived the skeletons she had tried so desperately to bury, proof not only of her deceit but of the rot that spread from her ambition into every corner of the organization we both served. I hesitated for the briefest of moments, my pulse pounding in my ears so loudly I wondered if the crowd could hear it too. But then I drew the first sheet into the light. Her brother's eyes fell on the page, scanning the signature at the bottom, his lips parting as though he recognized his own name twisted by a hand. That's my signature," he whispered, disbelief strangling his words. I shook my head slowly, my gaze steady. my voice cutting through the silence like a knife through silk. No, it isn't. Look closer. Look at the date. You were overseas that month. And yet your name is here, tied to a deal that drained thousands from the foundation. Murmurs rippled across the hall, louder now, like a storm brewing at sea, and her laughter forced and fragile collapsed into a choked protest. She fabricated this, she said, her voice cracking under the strain. But the paper trembled in her brother's hands as recognition dawned, the small details too familiar, the pen strokes mimicked with terrifying precision. He turned to her, his voice rising, no longer protecting her but piercing, straight into the wound she had tried to conceal. You forged my name. You lied to me. The weight of his words struck harder than anything I could have said, because betrayal from within bloodline cuts deeper than any accusation from an outsider. She staggered back, her heels scraping against the polished floor, her face blanching as she searched for an escape in a room where none existed. My chest burned with the memory of nights I had cried over her schemes, the helplessness of watching her flourish while I wilted in silence. And now here she was, crumbling before the eyes of those she had once commanded. Still, fear clawed at me. This was only one page, one fragment of her corruption. I knew she would strike back, desperate, venomous, willing to scorch the earth rather than surrender. The audience buzzed, torn between horror and fascination, and as I slipped the next sheet free, I realized that this wasn't just the unveiling of evidence. It was the dismantling of an empire built on lies. And if I faltered even for a heartbeat, she would drag me down with her. Every eye clung to me as though I were holding not just papers but fire. And perhaps I was, because every sheet threatened to burn away the carefully woven illusions she had wrapped around this place. My hand trembled slightly as I lifted the second page, its contents more damning than the first, not only exposing the forged signatures but revealing the trail of stolen donations funneled quietly into accounts tied to shell companies with names as hollow as her promises. A gasp rose from somewhere in the back of the hall, followed by another, and suddenly the air buzzed with the electricity of collective outrage. Her brother's face darkened, the fury in his eyes igniting like storm clouds splitting under lightning. And when he turned to her again, it was not with confusion, but with accusation as sharp as steel. You used me, he said, his voice breaking in a way that silenced even the whispers. She shook her head violently, her earrings clattering like chains, her lips forming denials that even she did not seem to believe anymore. It's not true. She planted these, she cried, her finger stabbing toward me, desperate to reclaim the narrative. But the words fell flat, drowned by the weight of what everyone could see for themselves. My throat tightened, a part of me still terrified that the tide could turn, that somehow her years of manipulation might claw their way back into dominance. But I forced my voice steady. Check the records. Cross-examine the dates. You'll see I'm not the liar here. The truth was heavy, but it was also liberating. And for the first time in years I felt taller, stronger, as though the shame she had coated me with was peeling away in strips. Yet, beneath that fragile strength, my stomach coiled with the awareness that this battle was far from won. She wasn't someone who surrendered. She was someone who destroyed, and if cornered, she would drag everything and everyone into the abyss with her. Her face twisted into something grotesque, the mask of elegance falling away to reveal desperation raw and unfiltered. She stepped forward, her voice rising in a shriek. Don't listen to her. She's jealous, bitter, trying to ruin me because she couldn't measure up. But the crowd no longer shifted toward her. They shifted back, recoiling from the storm she had unleashed, their loyalty dissolving in the acid of her panic. My pulse quickened. I knew this was the crack in her armor, the moment where the predator revealed herself as prey. But I also knew that predators fight hardest when cornered, and the night was about to spiral into something none of us could predict. The atmosphere in the hall had shifted into something volatile, like oxygen waiting for a spark, and every word spoken now seemed capable of igniting an explosion that none of us could contain. Her brother stood rigid, his hands curled into fists at his sides, torn between disbelief and rage, while she, cornered and unraveling, searched wildly for a foothold that no longer existed. I felt the gravity of 100 eyes upon me, weighing me down yet propelling me forward, demanding that I finish what I had started. The folder still held more receipts, emails, sworn statements, all the proof I had painstakingly gathered in secret, each page a shard of glass that could slice through her armor of lies. My throat was dry, my voice hoarse, but I pressed on, knowing hesitation could give her a chance to twist the narrative once more. "This is just the beginning," I said, holding the folder aloft, my words trembling but unbroken. A ripple of shock coursed through the audience, and her face paled as though the blood had drained from it entirely. She lunged forward suddenly, her hands outstretched, desperation flashing like a predator making its final strike. Instinctively, I pulled the folder closer to my chest, stepping back just in time for her brother to block her path. The gasp from the crowd was sharp, collective, as if everyone recognized the significance of that single movement. He was no longer at her side. His hand caught her wrist, firm yet trembling, his voice thunderous with betrayal. "Enough! You won't silence her the way you silenced everyone else." The word struck her harder than any blow, and for the first time, her composure shattered entirely. Tears streamed down her face, but they were not the tears of innocence, they were the tears of exposure, of realizing the fortress she had built was collapsing in on itself. Yet, even in her unraveling, I could sense danger. People like her did not crumble quietly. They lashed out, they clawed until there was nothing left standing. My heart pounded, not with victory, but with a chilling awareness. The night had only opened the first chapter of a war she would never stop fighting. And if I faltered even once, she would drag me into ruin with her. The crowd was no longer a passive audience. It had transformed into a tribunal, each face etched with suspicion, anger, and anticipation, their collective gaze suffocating her as effectively as any set of iron bars. She tugged her wrist free from her brother's grip and staggered backward, her heels wobbling on the polished floor, her chest heaving as though she were drowning in the very lies she had once wielded so skillfully. The chandelier light above caught the sheen of her tears, casting them not as symbols of innocence, but as glittering evidence of collapse. Yet, I did not allow myself to feel triumphant, not yet. Her history taught me better. I had seen her corner others before, and I knew her venom was sharpest when her survival was threatened. She opened her mouth again, her voice trembling but still laced with the venom of accusation. This is a setup," she cried, her fingers stabbing the air toward me. "She wants revenge, and she'll fabricate anything to destroy me." The words slithered through the hall, but they lacked the command they once carried. The audience, once her loyal stage, now flinched away from her theatrics, their murmurs thick with doubt. Her brother turned slowly toward me, his eyes searching mine, desperate for confirmation, for the final blow that would sever his loyalty once and for all. My hands quaked as I reached back into the folder, pulling free the third document, a bank transfer marked with her digital authorization code. I held it high, my voice resonating through the thick silence. "Then explain this. A transfer from the Foundation's relief fund to an account in your name." The reaction was seismic. The audience erupted in horrified gasps, their voices colliding into a storm of outrage that could not be restrained. She froze, her face draining of all color, her lips parting in a silent plea that never found sound. Her brother's eyes closed, tightly as though bracing himself against a truth he wished he could unsee. "Tell me it isn't true," he whispered, but she said nothing. The silence was damning. In that instant, I realized the battle was tilting irreversibly in my favor. I also felt a pang of dread, a chilling awareness that she would not allow this to end within these walls. Her power might be crumbling in this room, but outside of it, in the shadows, I knew she would plot her retaliation with the ferocity of a cornered beast. The tension inside the hall reached a fever pitch, as though every heartbeat in the room synchronized into one relentless drumbeat that threatened to shatter the chandeliers above us. Her silence was deafening, louder than her accusations, louder than her carefully rehearsed lies, and with every passing second it condemned her further. She clutched the sides of her dress as though the fabric could anchor her in reality, her knuckles whitening under the strain, her breath coming in shallow gasps that betrayed the panic clawing inside her chest. The audience pressed closer, no longer restrained by courtesy or awe, their whispers gaining courage, mutating into open accusations, their words flying like arrows she could not dodge. She stole from us. She betrayed the foundation. How long has she been lying? Each phrase was a stone cast at the crumbling pedestal she had built for herself. I stood there, my folder trembling in my hands, my body both exhausted and electric, because this moment, this unveiling, was something I had dreamt of but never fully believed would arrive. Yet fear was still there, gnawing at the edges of my resolve, whispering that exposure in public was only one battle, that her reach extended beyond these walls, into boardrooms, into politics, into dark corners where power could be bought and truth buried. Her brother's voice rose again, slicing through the noise like a blade. You let me defend you. You let me fight for you while you were gutting everything we stood for. His words were not shouted, but they carried the weight of a man broken, and the quiet devastation in his tone struck harder than rage ever could. She staggered toward him, reaching out a trembling hand, but he recoiled, his rejection final, his loyalty severed before the eyes of all. The crowd gasped again, not because they doubted anymore, but because they realized the fall they were witnessing was total familial, professional, personal. My heart clenched at the sight, but I held my ground, knowing this was the moment I had fought for, the vindication that had cost me sleepless nights and constant fear. And yet, somewhere deep inside, I felt the stirrings of unease, the warning that though she was crumbling now, predators did not die easily. They retreated, they regrouped, they came back hungrier. The thought chilled me, but I did not allow it to show on my face. Instead, I let the silence stretch, the evidence speak, and the crowd's condemnation wash over her until even she seemed to shrink beneath its weight. The room, once adorned with glittering laughter and the tinkling of champagne glasses, had transformed into an arena of reckoning. The music had long since died, the orchestra's instruments resting silently like abandoned weapons, and the grand chandelier above flickered, faintly as though even the lights themselves wished to dim under the weight of what was being revealed. She stood at the center of it all, a figure once untouchable now unraveling thread by thread, her breathing ragged, her gaze darting from one condemning face to another in frantic search of a savior. But none came. The crowd that once adored her now recoiled as though she carried a contagion, their voices sharpened into a chorus of outrage that cut deeper than any blade. Fraud, thief, liar. The words swirled through the air, branding her with truths she could no longer evade. My heart pounded, each beat colliding with the memory of the nights I had lain awake replaying her manipulations. Every moment she tried to suffocate me beneath her lies, every opportunity she'd stolen. This was justice unfolding before my eyes, but it was not without its shadows. As I watched her falter, I felt a gnawing dread in my gut because justice for someone like her was never a quiet ending. She was too cunning, too dangerous, too desperate to fade away without striking back. Her brother turned his back on her, his broad shoulders stiff with betrayal, his silence louder than all the accusations hurled her way. She reached for him again, but he shook her off, and the sight of his Rejection sent another wave of whispers, cascading through the audience. My grip on the folder tightened, the plastic edges biting into my palms, because though I had revealed much, I still had more enough to finish this fight tonight. But did I dare? Did I risk showing everything here, before witnesses who might twist the narrative later? Or did I hold some truths back as the weapons for the battles that would surely follow outside these gilded walls? The decision tormented me in real time, the weight of it pressing like stone upon my ribs. But when I looked into her eyes, wild, cornered, seething with promises of retaliation, I knew hesitation would be my undoing. She would not wait. She would not forgive. She would not forget. And so, with trembling resolve, I prepared to draw out the final blade hidden within my folder. Even as the air thickened with dread and the crowd surged closer, hungry for the fatal blow, my fingers slipped inside the folder again, brushing against the final packet of documents, and for a moment it felt as though fire coursed through my veins. The crowd pressed forward, their collective breath thickening the air, their curiosity transforming into an almost tangible hunger for truth. I drew out the final piece, an email chain printed and highlighted, lines that revealed not just financial theft, but collusion. Her conversations with contractors who bribed their way into contracts meant for honest vendors. Her digital fingerprints smeared across every message like blood on a weapon. I held it high, the pages trembling in my hands, my voice clear despite the storm raging in my chest. This, I declared, isn't just betrayal of trust. This is corruption. This is exploitation of the very people we were meant to serve. The audience gasped as though the walls themselves had cracked open. Her brother lunged forward, snatching the papers from me, his eyes scanning frantically, and the moment he recognized the damning evidence, his knees nearly buckled. "My God," he muttered, horror soaking every syllable. "It's true." The crowd erupted, no longer whispering but shouting, their outrage spilling into chaos. Some demanded her resignation, others shouted for the police, their voices crashing together like thunder in a storm that refused to abate. She stood frozen, her painted face as pale as porcelain, her body trembling under the onslaught of exposure. Then, with a sudden ferocity, she lashed out, her voice raw and guttural. "This isn't over," she screamed, pointing directly at me, her finger shaking but deadly. "You think you've won, Sheri, but you have no idea who you're dealing with. I will destroy you. I will tear you apart until there's nothing left of you but regret." Her words slashed the air, and though the crowd jeered and her brother recoiled, I felt the weight of them sink into my bones like ice. Because I knew she meant it. She had been stripped bare, humiliated, unmasked, but a predator stripped of its crown is not harmless. It is dangerous, untethered, more lethal than before. My body shuddered as the room spiraled into chaos around us, security moving closer, her allies shrinking back, the foundation board whispering frantically in clusters, but all I could hear were her words echoing in my mind. A warning, a threat, a promise. This night might end with her defeated, but the war between us had only begun, and I could feel in my marrow that she would come for me with every ounce of venom she still had left. The threat lingered in the air like the aftertaste of bitter medicine, and though the room swirled in uproar, my thoughts carved a narrow path through the noise. I felt the gravity of her words settle over me, a cold, deliberate calculus. She would not accept defeat gracefully. Around us people argued, some calling for calm, others yelling for action, but their voices blurred into the background of a single steady drumbeat in my ears, the relentless rhythm of survival. I had exposed her in public, but exposure is only the first strike. The real battle would be quieter, patient and vicious. Whispered lies, planted evidence, sudden allegations, lawsuits issued in the dead of night. I pictured her scheming in shadowed rooms, dialing numbers, sending messages, twisting facts until they fit her narrative. My hands still trembled from the adrenaline surge, but beneath that tremor was resolve that had been forged in years of silence. I realized, with a clarity that felt almost holy, that I could not return to the person who swallowed slights and pretended they were breath. I owed myself more than that, and I owed others the courage to stand. Security ushered her out as the crowd continued its cacophony, and as the doors closed behind them, I felt both relief and dread. The foundation board clustered like vultures, their whispered plans already turning into motions of inquiry and emergency meetings, but there was also a dangerous hunger among them. Justice tinted with spectacle. Outside, the night held its own conspiracies. Headlights carved brief revelations into the darkness as cars streamed away with people carrying fragments of the evening into lives that would now be altered forever. I remained in the center of that ruined ballroom, clutching the emptiness where the folder had been taken, feeling both naked and vindicated. Then, as the crowd began to thin, a woman approached me, her face half hidden beneath a shawl, her eyes filled with a gratitude that trembled on the verge of tears. She pressed a gloved hand to my elbow and whispered, "You did the right thing." Her voice was a small island of warmth in the cold sea of accusation, and for a moment I let myself believe the world could be stitched back together. That night taught me something about the fragility of trust. It can mend, but its seams are always visible. They will scar and remember the strain. I walked to my car under a sky stripped of stars, aware that every step might be watched, that every conversation could be recorded, turned into ammunition. I started my engine and sat for a long while, replaying the entire scene, cataloging who might stand with me and who would flee into the shelter of self-preservation. Then my phone buzzed. The message was short. They promised they'd protect her. "She's not finished. No number. No signature." Just like that, the open wound of the evening pulsed anew. I felt the room closing again, but now the theater was over. The real theater was only beginning. My fingers hovered over the screen, then typed a reply I hadn't rehearsed. "I'm ready." The following days blurred into a pattern of guarded meetings and quiet vigilance. I convened with lawyers and a handful of colleagues who still believed in the mission. Together we mapped timelines, corroborated dates, and prepared a dossier that left no room for slippage. We set up legal buffers and public statements designed to anticipate every false narrative she might unleash. Nights became rehearsals. I practiced answers, steadied my voice, and planned how to protect those who had been terrified into silence. Small acts of sabotage began almost immediately. Anonymous threats delivered as tax notices, an attempt to discredit a witness with a forged document, and late-night calls that went unanswered, but left the faintest trace of menace. Each attack arrived like a test. How far would she go? And each time we responded with verification, with counter-evidence, with witnesses stepping forward. The pattern emerged. When exposed, she shifted to stealth, turning to quieter forms of warfare, trying to corrode the foundations of truth from within. Underneath the legal skirmishes, something harder was taking root in me. The person who had once cowered beneath slights was changing. I cultivated a steadiness that felt like armor. Not cold hardness, but a tempered resilience that allowed tenderness to survive alongside vigilance. I no longer wanted merely to punish. I wanted to repair what had been broken, to restore trust where it had been exploited. That conviction guided each decision, restraining me from petty revenge, even when the temptation shimmered like a quick and satisfying flame. Word of the scandal spread beyond our city, and with it came public scrutiny that felt both vindicating and terrifying. Interviews were requested, statements demanded, and my life tilted under the weight of attention. Some praised me for courage. Others labeled me reckless. Through it all, I kept returning to the faces of those who had been hurt by her greed, the volunteers, the families denied assistance, the honest people who had lost their faith. For them, this fight was not a spectacle but survival. Allies arrived from unexpected corners. A former intern with a recording that corroborated a key meeting, a contractor with bank statements, and a volunteer who remembered details that tied several threads together. These small testimonies built into a mosaic of truth. And as they assembled, the image of her misconduct sharpened into something undeniable. At the same time, the Foundation's leadership scrambled, some choosing to protect their reputations, others finally embracing accountability. The interlocking politics were exhausting. Every step forward required careful calculation, and every ally required protection from the inevitable backlash. But even as momentum favored us, threats persisted. An unmarked envelope containing a photograph of my apartment building, a legal summons for a defamation suit filed by one of her associates, and subtle attempts to discredit our witnesses. Somebody was trying to bluff me into retreat. Each provocation tested my resolve, yet each also steeled it. I adopted routines to keep myself safe, altered my routes, and trusted a small circle whom I vetted carefully. Paranoia was a danger, but so was naivete. Learning to balance caution with courage became part of my daily work. One morning, months after that fateful gala, her brother called me. He asked for a meeting in a small cafe far from the Foundation's glass towers. I went, notebook in hand, prepared for exchanges that might reopen wounds. But when he arrived, he was different, hollowed by the experience, remorse written on his face. He apologized, not for everything she had done, but for his blindness. He offered testimony, documents he had saved when he first suspected wrong, and a willingness to face the public truth. His repentance was messy and incomplete, but it was real, and in that moment a new doorway opened. Accountability that could force institutional change rather than mere theatrical punishment. The cafe door swung shut behind him as he placed the folder on the table, and for a moment the weight of months collapsed into silence, heavy and fragile. I opened it slowly, page after page of invoices, confidential memos and signed authorizations that left no room for interpretation. She had orchestrated a web of corruption larger than even I had guessed. The implications reached far beyond her, touching donors, officials, even board members who had once smiled at me with polished teeth. My pulse quickened as I realized this was not just about one woman's downfall, but the exposure of an entire culture built on complicity and greed. I looked at her brother, saw the regret carved deep into his tired face, and felt a strange mix of pity and resolve. "This is enough," I whispered, and for the first time in years, my voice did not waver. Within weeks, the evidence was turned over to investigators, and the slow machinery of justice began to grind. Headlines followed, indictments were issued, reputations collapsed. She fought with every ounce of venom, hiring lawyers, buying silence, launching smear campaigns against me. But the tide had turned. For each lie she told, truth rose stronger, undeniable, carried by the voices of those she had once silenced. In the courtroom, when the verdict was finally read, I sat with my spine straight, listening as years of fear and humiliation were reduced to a single declaration: guilty. She glared at me as they led her away, eyes blazing with the same venom from that night, but this time her power dissolved into nothingness. I was not triumphant. I was changed. The journey from victim to survivor had cost me innocence, but it had given me something far greater: resilience, clarity, a purpose stitched into the marrow of who I was. I left the courthouse into a world that still bore scars, but also into a future where silence no longer held me hostage. And as I walked forward, the words formed in my heart like a final vow, echoing for anyone who had ever been broken by cruelty. Revenge is not about destruction. It is about reclaiming yourself. If you want to hear more stories of survival, of justice carved out of shadows, and of resilience born from tragedy, then stay with me. Because this fight is not just mine, It belongs to everyone who has ever been silenced. Like, share and subscribe. And walk with me into the light where no lie can survive.